Welcome. Thank you for coming to the Whalen Library. I hope the folks at home can hear me. Please send a signal if you can't. Tonight we're excited to have Bob Began back here with us in person at the library to share with us the fascinating life of Gertrude Bell. Bob grew up in Maine and graduated from Babson. He served 2 years in the Army and had a 35-year career in the paper and film industry. Now retired, Bob greatly enjoys researching and teaching popular topics in history, as you will experience this evening. Thank you so much to Bob for coming tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you, Courtney.
Just a couple quick housekeeping notes. We're recording this session, so you'll be able to view it again and share it with your friends on our YouTube page, possibly on Waycam. I didn't ask Bob about how long is the presentation?
An hour.
An hour, and then we'll have some time for
Okay.
questions at the end. If you're joining us via Zoom and you have a question, just type it in the chat and I will raise my hand and read it aloud to Bob. So I think that's it.
Yeah.
I'll hand it over.
Okay, thank you. So when I pick a topic to give a talk on the presentation, invariably it's naval history, World War II, or some tale of exploration. And Gertrude Bell popped up. Well, I gave a talk on Lawrence of Arabia years ago. And there was this Englishwoman, Gertrude Bell, who popped up during the talk. And I tell you, she makes Lawrence of Arabia look like a stay-at-home. She was undaunted, fearless, unstoppable. You have to go back a couple hundred years to see what the world was like back then. At the turn of the century, 1900, England, the largest empire in the world, ruled by a very, very successful woman, Queen Victoria. And to me, it's not that long ago, but it seems like light years ago in terms of how much has transitioned from there. She was born July 14th, 1868, first daughter of Hugh and Mary Bell. She would truly be a daughter of the empire. Her grandfather, Lewithian Bell, he was a man of possessing manufacturer's genius with scientific learning. He would amass huge wealth from his commercial ventures. He had coal mines, he had colliers, he had steel factories, he had limestone quarries. He was a scientist, a politician. He was very, very high on the food chain of success. He had immense confidence. He was truly a man of the world, and he was fully aware of his place in it. This world witnessed the growth and power of the greatest British empire, of the greatest empire ever, the British Empire. At the center of the universe, it presided over more land, more oceans, and more people than any other empire. It was estimated that 1 out of every 4 people in the world were in the British Empire. It was commonly acknowledged that no nation had come further than Great Britain. Presiding over the empire, just a little bit of a map. Here's a map. It shows the Ottoman Empire, which was the source of the power for the Middle East at the time of Gertrude Bell. This is the Ottoman Empire in 1683. It has shrunk considerably, just the purple area, by 1914. So the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe. It was getting condensed and smaller and smaller and smaller. Queen Victoria was presiding over the British Empire. Under her reign, the British would strive to protect the natives, spread morality, uphold the trade, and defend the realm. The age of empire, the confidence of being the most powerful and the best, all were filled with optimism. That was the world Gertrude Bell was born into. It might be considered a man's world, but that didn't mean that women had no role. They were, in their domesticity, no less than the guardians of the English race. There were certain expectations of a young woman of a higher class. These included a healthy body, which was conducive to a healthy mind, fluency in at least 2 languages, preferably French or German, that was essential, sewing, painting, needlework, ability to play a musical instrument. All of these would help a young woman become a prospective bride who would raise the children as a good mother and faithful wife. As a child, Gertrude develops an extremely close relationship with her mother and her father. Her mother, Mary, dies when Gertrude is 3. When she's 8 years old, her father marries Florence Olaf, a sophisticated playwright raised in Paris, recently moved to London, and she impressed many with her elegant looks, style, and aristocratic bearing. Gertrude would make many efforts to please her stepmother, but she wasn't always successful in pleasing her or meeting her mother's high standards. Anything less than perfection would result in a stern assessment by the mother, and this would widen the gap between her and Gertrude. As a child, very difficult to manage.
Ignore me. I'm gonna get you a microphone.
Okay.
Keep going.
Numerous nannies would try and they would fail. She was willful, stubborn, scowling, opinionated, fearless, and in today's parlance, she was always pushing the envelope. She would climb up on the greenhouse roof. She would turn the hose on in the chimney and flood the laundry fires. She would run and hide from the nanny at the beach. She would encourage her brother to do all of these things. At times, Florence would be at wit's end with this difficult child. She was always seeking to learn. She found refuge in books, a voracious reader. She devoured books. At age 11, she's completed History of the English People. At age 14, she's read all of Browning's poetry. She loved Silas Minor at age 16. Here's the Queen, very, very accomplished empress. She really did have a huge sway over the world. In the 1800s, in the late 1800s, women of a higher class were usually taught at home by a number of tutors. Very rare that one would be sent off to school for higher learning. Both Gertrude's parents were well aware of her need to satisfy her desire to learn, and at the same time reduce the levels of stress in the family. In 1884, she was sent to Queen's College, an all-girls school in London. As a student, she would excel. She missed the countryside. She missed her brother. She resented the lack of freedom she had at home. The constant need for a chaperone, the need for permission to socialize with anyone not on the approved family list. All of these things kind of kept the brakes on her. But she would persist in her studies, and in her final term, she would request permission from her father to attend Oxford. How's that? Any difference?
Yeah, better.
Is it? Okay. So she's going to Oxford. She's going to enter the realm of the elite and the powerful. She's going to enter a world governed by men, or most completely ruled by men. 1886 to 1888, she studies at Oxford. At the end of her second year, she's 12 months ahead of schedule. She's preparing for her last written exams. She found most of the exam questions delightful. Her final grades resulted in her receiving a first in modern history. She's the first woman to do so. She's 20, and she's just one accomplishment after another. But with all of the brilliant academic success, there's one area of her life that is lagging. She's now 20 years of age, and so far, no hand offered in marriage. Perhaps a trip abroad might help. Bucharest, Paris, Constantinople, a chance to get rid of that Oxfordy manner and meet a prospective husband. After all, she must be ready. for her coming out in London during the spring season. Society dictated that young women were expected to find a mate within 3 years, and the clock was ticking. This is a picture of a celebration in India that she would go to. It was the Durbar. These celebrations, she was always had access. She was always invited to the best of the parties, the best of the tables. She had good credentials. She's traveling, but she's gone to Europe in 1892. She's going through Europe and the Middle East. She's at an embassy party in Tehran. She meets the legation secretary who interests her. He's rather thin, tall, agreeable, intelligent, a great tennis player, billiard player, and devoted to riding, even though he can't ride in the least. Henry Cadogan is 10 years older, a gambler, quite worldly, does not come from a well-to-do family, and his salary was not worthy of a woman of her class. Nevertheless, Gertrude wants to marry him. She seeks permission from her father. He's against the marriage. He thinks it would be best if they both go their separate ways. Despite her sorrow, she respects the social rules and she goes back to England. Within a year, in 1893, Cadogan dies, supposedly falling into a river while fishing. Stuff happens.
Gosh, she would have been sad if she'd been a widow, because then she'd have the power to do whatever she wanted.
No. True.
She should have married the
Yeah,
guy.
yeah, she could, absolutely. For the next 5 years, she continues to travel throughout the world. She learns several more languages, including Arabic, Persian, and Italian. She pursues a new interest. Here's the family home, rather a humble gathering place. Here's a picture of her as a young lady. She loved the gardens at the house. She loved flowers. She was very, very appreciative of nature. She spends 5 years traveling all over the world throughout Europe. She takes up a new hobby, climbing. She climbs the Alps. Her first climb was the Meiji, 13,600 feet in the French Alps. She goes on to build a reputation as an excellent and fearless alpinist. She has 2 guides. She reaches the summit of Mont Blanc, 15,700 feet in 1900. Her most taxing climb would be a mountain called the Finsteraarhorn. She spends 57 hours on the mountain in terrible weather and numerous close calls. Her chief guide described her. Of all the amateur climbers he had known, he added, men and women, no one had equaled her in coolness and bravery and judgment. Her fame and reputation grew significantly among the climbing community. She was not adverse to this. She accepts an invitation to visit friends in Jerusalem in 1900. She goes through Palestine, Lebanon, and this whets her appetite to see more of the Middle East. She starts to feel the pull of the Middle East. Reading about Lawrence of Arabia, when he first saw the Middle East, he felt he was drawn to it. It had a very magnetic pull on some Europeans. She goes back to England for family obligations, but she makes plans to travel in the future. Now, her ability to travel was due in part to her family's wealth. In 1904, her grandfather, Sir Lothian Bell, would leave to each of his grandchildren $752,000 in real money, and to his son, Hugh, an estate of $112 million in today's money. In 1902, she's in India with her brother to attend Edward VII's ascension to King of England and Emperor of India. The Durbar celebrating this event was a celebration of English power and intended to show India the benefits of English leadership to less gifted people. Gathering of dignitaries, luminaries, maharajas, and princely leaders would laud the progress and grandeur of regions fortunate enough to be part of the British Empire would experience. She would be granted access to the best seats, parties, and receptions. She would hobnob with members of the India Civil Service, that club of Oxford and Cambridge graduates, who would administer justice, order, and adherence to British basic business interests. She would enjoy numerous chances to connect with key people in government, one of whom was David Hogarth. Hogarth was the head of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, very, very foremost traveler and expert on the Middle East. This is the area that she's in. She's just up in here in the early 1900s. Ultimately, she's going to go way down here. And she's going to go where she wants. She's planning her itineraries. She heads east again in 1905. She's working on a book which will describe the social, cultural, archaeological, and anthropological aspects of the East. She wants to focus on the lifestyles of the Bedouin and the Druze tribes. She's aware that the Turks are suspicious of English travelers, so she will hire a kabas, and a kabas would be a guy, who could help you get through customs. He knows all the regulations. You throw him a few dollars, and it's much, much easier. Germany, at this time in the early 1900s, Germany is ascending. They are having more and more influence in the Middle East through the Ottoman Empire, through Turkey. The British are very, very concerned about this area because of this little spit right here, the Suez Canal. That is the key to the jewel in the crown, India. So England wants to make sure that nothing is going to happen to jeopardize that relationship. Germany is developing a strong presence up in Turkey, and that force is coming south to the point where there's a railroad, the Hejaz Railroad built down here, and the Turks, under German support, want to extend the railroad all the way down. So England is becoming more and more concerned with what's going on here. England also does not know a hell of a lot about who lives here, what they think, what their allegiances are. They know it's all tribal, but they don't know what tribe might align themselves with the Ottomans, what tribe might want to break with the Ottomans. So it's pretty much an unknown area. One of the values that Lawrence would have was he was boots on the ground. He was able to tell the British, such and such a tribe would probably side with England. Such and such a tribe would definitely be with the Turks. So he was the source of information. She makes him look like a village idiot compared to what she finds out. The amount of information Gertrude Bell generates for the British Empire is phenomenal. And this is well before the war. So she's going to travel east. She wants to write a book on the Arab tribes. In her luggage, she has a couple of books, Arabia Deserta by Charles Doughty, and The Penetration of Arabia by David Hogarth, two Englishmen who wrote earlier travel journeys. Also packed away discreetly were items one would not expect a wealthy Englishwoman would carry in her luggage, such as a pistol, numerous maps, compass, rifle, and plenty of ammunition. The weapons would be packed carefully in her cabin trunk, neatly folded and covered by numerous white petticoats. So as she's going through customs, she's chatting casually about the weather with the chief customs officer, while her kavass is present, and he's telling everybody that she was a very great lady. She thinks it's taking them too much time to get through customs. And she says, it is needless that they should search this much to the kavass. And he responds, I have understood, O lady, At that moment, one of the inspectors glances at some maps, and to distract the search, Gertrude again speaks to the chief, and she remarks about the rain. By God, O lady, it is your excellency says, God alone knows when the rain will cease. And then the Kavass orders the search to end. The customs chief orders the search to end. The Kavass joins in saying, Yalla, oh boy, are you going to take all night? I go upon your pleasure, she says to the customs chief. The search is over. He responds, go in peace. That night, in writing in her diary, she writes about how she pulled off a successful fraud and how she gave the Kavass an extra tip. So she wants to go to meet Ibn Rashid. He's the emir of the Najd. And the Najd is pretty much down in this area here. It's way, way far away. He, excuse me, Ibn Rashid, he's the emir of the Najd. He's the head of the Shema tribe. Chief rival is Ibn Saud. Saud is the head of the Anaza tribe. These two men hate each other. Rashid is supported by the Turks, the English back Saud. They tell Gertrude, the British government tells her, everybody tells her, do not go into this area. It's dangerous, and even if you do get in, Rashid will not let you go free. Hearing this news only encourages her to do more and more. She wants to go in. So in Jerusalem, she meets an Englishman, Mark Sykes. She meets this Englishman, Mark Sykes. He considers himself an expert on Arab culture. He considers himself to be the source of accurate information on what any given tribe will do. He has a low opinion of the Arabs. Quote, idle beyond all hope, diseased, cunning, insolent, and despicable. Well, at first he and Gertrude get along well until he learns that she's planning on taking the same route that he wants to interview Rashid. He calls her a bitch, and he wishes 10,000 of my worst bad words on the head of that damned fool. He further states, wherever she goes, she causes an uproar, and she was a silly, chattering windbag of conceited gushing, flat-chested man-woman, globe-trotting, rump-wagging, blithering ass. So that kind of sums up his feelings. Sykes is, you know about Mark Sykes? Sykes, I'll jump ahead, it's a separate story. As World War I finally goes on and the British realize that they're going to win this war, and now they have to realize they have made promises to the Arabs, saying to the Arab tribes, if you join us, any lands you help to liberate will be under your control. And that's the carrot. And this was very, very clearly told to the Arab leadership. As England and France realize they're going to win, they have to change their plans because they promised all of this land to go to the tribes, but now they know there's oil in this part and France wants this part. So they basically come up with a new map, which basically defines the new borders. Sykes was the English creator. Picot was a French. And between the two of them, they came up with this border, which really it was a classic example of false diplomacy. But Sykes, calling her all these bad names doesn't thwart her at all. She has to call off the trip. She goes back to England. And she's in Turkey, and she meets back to Turkey. She meets an English consul. His name is Dick Doughty Wiley. He's a charming young soldier with a quite pleasant little wife. He is the more interesting of the two. He's a good type of Englishman, wide awake, on the spot, keen to see and learn. educated at Sandhurst, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Autumn Montague Doughty Wiley, also known to his friends as Dick or Richard, was a decorated war hero wounded in the Boer War, also in the Chinese Rebellion. He's the same age as Gertrude. He's taller, mustachioed, and he's married to Judith for 3 years. He's the nephew of the famous Charles Doughty, author of Arabia Deserta, which would serve as Gertrude's Bible in her Middle Eastern travels. He's the consummate male of the British Empire, a decorated soldier statesman, a sensitive and literate scholar, a lustful man who arouses her desires. The more she would see Dick, the more she desired of him. Now, in the early stages of the friendship, he, Gertrude, and Judith would all correspond with each other. She found herself falling in love with him. She found in him a man who shared her love of the East, the desert, the Arabs, poetry, and literature, the ancient worlds, and modern politics. No one in her lifetime was even remotely like him. As much as he loved her, he would not leave his wife. They could care for each other, and they could write their thoughts in letters, but he would never be hers. In 1913, he's posted to the Balkans. He's gone, and all she has are memories. This is a picture of her at one of the ruins. She was an excellent photographer. She knew architecture. I mean, she had so many skills. This is a typical Bedouin chieftain. This is Howitat. He was the head of the Howitat tribe. He would be an ally of the British as long as the gold sovereigns kept coming. He was influential. She would have dealings with him. 1905, she heads for the Druze and the Beni Saka with her party of a cook. She's got a cook and 3 mule tenders. These are 2 tribes, the Druze and the Beni Saka. She reaches the Beni Saka first. She spends the night with them. The next day, she visits with their enemy, the Druze. She's dining with the Druze sheikh. She's smoking cigarettes, drinks strong coffee, and she shares stories. She observes a Druze celebration as the young men prepare to raid the Beni Saka, who had stolen 5,000 sheep from them the day before. Accepting an invitation to the gathering and listening to the sound of rejoicing for blood and honor, she is told, "Lady, the English and the Druze are one." She responds, "Thank God, we too are a fighting race." Later that night in her diary, she writes about becoming a European again, bent on peaceful pursuits and not naked and primitive passions. She spends 3 weeks in the area. She's conversing with the various tribal leaders, as well as Turkish officials who treat her cordially. She's learning the mood of the tribe. She's learning the landscape. She's learning the features where the oases are. She will prepare her report for the British when she returns to Damascus. With her full acceptance by the Arabs, she's become an extremely valuable source of intelligence for the British government. Growing relationship between Turkey and Germany is causing concerns amongst the British. She spends the rest of the year working on her book. She publishes it. The title of the book is The Desert and the Somme, and it describes her travel in Syria. The book makes her a formidable and distinguished author on Arab culture. She writes, "I am a person." Here's a picture of the terrain that she will travel through. This is Ukhaida. This is a ruin that she will go to, and she will photograph it. She will measure the various distances. Nobody in Europe knows about this, and this is part of the book that she would write, her book on the nature of the tribes. In 1909, she heads east again. She studied at the Royal Geographic Society. She learns how to survey. She learns map making. These will be helpful skills in charting the unknown regions of Mesopotamia for the British government, which knows little about the geography. It would also help her in her measurement of ancient runes. She wants to go from Damascus to Baghdad, then to Syria, and she wants to return to Turkey. She'll go through various tribal areas. One night, as she lay asleep in her tent, she wakes to find a robber in her tent. She tries to pursue him, but he escapes with her money, clothes, boots, saddlebags, and one of her trunks. All her notes and work of the preceding 4 months is gone. Ultimately, after conferring with the Turkish governor and the British consul, they discovered who the thief was. They get everything back except her money. Returning to England, she thinks the trip was a splendid success. I mean, setbacks like this just roll off her. Her discovery and study of the ancient ruins of Al-Qaeda would grant her a solid reputation as an archaeologist. Unfortunately, she would be surpassed by a French archaeologist who just published his book just before she got back. Nevertheless, she was smitten by the desert even more. Quote, I think every day of the Syrian desert must prolong your life by 2 years. She spends the next year and a half in England. She's doing further research, and she plans another trip to Mesopotamia. January, 2 years later, she's back in the Middle East, this time a focus on Byzantine and Roman ruins. On May 19th, she sets out to visit the ruins of Karshemish. This is a site of an archaeological dig, and she will meet a young Englishman there, T.E. Lawrence. I love the fact that people kept diaries in those days because you know what they were thinking. So this is her reaction, her estimation of Lawrence. An interesting boy. He's going to make a traveler. Lawrence, on the other hand, was somewhat guarded in his comments. She is pleasant, about 36, not beautiful, well, except perhaps with a veil on. This would be the start of a very long and storied relationship. They both were in love with the desert. They both wanted to advance the Bedouin tribes into self-government. And they really dedicated much of their lives to doing this. Lawrence was a loner, a pacifist, if you will, but he just loved the desert so much. And he actually goes from being an archaeology student to leading men in combat, where he's actually setting the charges underneath the rail tracks to blow up the Turkish trains. He's killing people. He actually, I mean, it would be in today's parlance, he has PTSD, but he's totally dedicated to helping the Arabs. And the problem is, he knows that the English are going to betray their promises. And so he's, on one hand, trying to serve the Arabs and also serve the Queen. So he just knows, I mean, this is destined to end in failure. Meanwhile, she's back in Mesopotamia. They get along well, she and Lawrence, but she has yet to go to the great desert, the Negev. She wants to meet the most powerful rulers, Ibn Saud and Ibn Rashid. She wanted to meet them 4 years ago, but it didn't work out. They hate each other. The more she is told about how dangerous and risky it is, the more she is anxious to start. In the summer of 1913, she realizes the only way she can get away from not having Dick Dowdy, he's been posted to the Balkans. And now, 1913, war is imminent. She says, I've got to go back to the East. And she plans the trip to see the two Arab leaders. The Turks support Rashid, the British support Saud. Both of them tell her, we can't protect you. She's going to cover 1,600 miles by camel from Damascus across the Arabian Peninsula. And come down here, and she's going to head into here. to the fortress, Rashid's fortress, which is in Hayel. That's the location. She's going to have 2 tents, one for sleeping, one for bathing. She's going to have one for eating and writing. Also, a canvas tub for bathing, numerous clothes for riding, as well as evening gowns for dinners with sheikhs and dignitaries, either at consuls or in Bedouin tents. Cameras, film, compasses, writing paper, cartography paper, .30 revolvers, lots of ammunition, and cigarette cases. And then there would be the gifts destined for sheikhs and those in authority. And these consisted of bolts of cloth, telescopes, coffee, sugar, and revolvers. She has a party of 17 camels, her guide, camel drivers, and a rafiq. A rafiq is the same as the kibas. He's a paid guide. December 16th, 1913, they start the trek. 5 days later, they're attacked by the Druze, a warlike tribe. It's chaotic. Riders are circling them, demanding their weapons and luggage, threatening to kill them all. When all of a sudden, one of the camel drivers, a young boy named Felah, comes out crying, "Hey, I'm your friend." They stop. They recognize him. He was their guest, and he had stayed with the Druze. No problem. Everything is fine. Etiquette of the desert kicks in and the chaos stops. Strict rule that one must always give shelter for the night to a traveler in need. You can rob them during the daytime, but you got to give them shelter at night. The Druze sheikh accepts the gift from Gertrude, and the party's allowed to continue. January 8th, they've been on the trail since December 16th. They're halted by Turkish patrols. They would detain her for 6 days. Finally, they let her leave. At the same time, she receives permission from the Turks after paying some bribes. She's in the desert. She knows how to abide in the desert code. She would approach the man in charge, the sheikh with the largest tent, or the visible leader. Her ability to speak directly in fluent Arabic was pivotal. She also knew that she had to display an air of equality, which stemmed from her lineage as being a daughter of a great sheikh. She was fearless and direct. Her goal was to convince the sheikh that she also was powerful, not a threat, and possibly an ally. She knew when to ask, when to listen, what gifts to give, and what gifts to accept. She paid the customary fees for the rafiq, protection money. Her knowledge of Arabian poetry was extensive. In a land with little written works, her ability to recite these poems to tribal leaders in Arabic was highly impressive. I mean, it boggles me to think of it. I'm an Arab Bedouin Tribes leader, and in comes this woman with a fur collar and smoking, and she's reciting poetry in Arabic to me. It's like, yeah, amazing. And she gets, but the thing is, she is just accepted by the Bedouin leadership. And if the lower members of the tribe see the sheikh accepting her, she's in. Nobody's going to give her any grief. February the 11th, they meet. They've been gone 2 months. They meet the Nafud, the desert. This is the worst desert of all. The camels struggle in deep, soft sand. They roast at night. They roast during the day. At night, it's freezing. Depression, exhaustion, and miserable rain will weigh them down. Finally, after 13 days, they reach the beginning of the Najd Desert, the most threatening desert of Arabia. We have come to the gates of hell. They're within hours of Hayel. Hayel is the ancient city in medieval times. It was a hub of commerce, lay between the Arabian Gulf and the Levantine coast. It was a stop on the frankincense route. It was a key stopping point for pilgrims on their way to Mecca. And as she views the city from afar, she sends 2 of her men forward to announce her arrival in the morning. She would ride a camel into the city. This is the ruins of Ukhaidan. This is Dick Doughty Wiley, his wife, Gertrude is on the left, and that is Lawrence of Arabia. She was much taller than him. Mark Sykes, the role of the despicable Englishman. This is on their way to the jet. And this is not soft sand. This is all very, very sharp rocks. And they're just, these are the mountains. I mean, daunting terrain. This is Ibn Rashid, one of the Arab leaders. This is one of the men she will deal with. So she's going into the castle to find out that the leader is not there. He's leading a tribal warfare thing. He's going against an enemy tribe. And the person in charge of the fortress is like a 16-year-old nephew. All the other people above him with any connection to the throne have been either murdered or poisoned. Very, very bloodthirsty existence. But they don't know what to do with her. So they keep her. They keep her confined to quarters for 2 weeks. And she is really irate, but she can't do anything. And the sheikh is still traveling, and he sends word, well, just wait, I'll get back at some point and everything. But she spends 2 weeks, and she finally, and she's not allowed to go anywhere. She has to stay within certain quarters. This is one of the rooms she's in. These tapestries on the wall, they're all high ceilings. These are a couple of the people who are guarding her. Loved posing. This is Hussein. Hussein was the leader of the tribe in southern, what would now be Iran and Iraq. And he has 4 sons. And he was, when he joined the British forces to fight against the Turks, that was a big turning point. So, and he thinks he's going to come out and be the #1 Arab leader once the war is over. This is at the castle where she's prisoner. These are the balconies. A picture of the women in the harem. Out in public, the women had to wear a mask. When you move from one place to another, the woman has to put everything together. It's like
That hasn't changed.
I mean, I know with that, but it is. Excuse me. So what's happening now? The war is going on. It's pretty clear what tribe will ally themselves with the British, what tribe will stay with the Turks. The British government is starved for information, much of which will come from Gertrude and Lawrence. Lawrence will be the boots on the ground. He'll be actually with the troops fighting, but she's in the background visiting one tribe after another. She can draw maps. She knows everything. The movie Lawrence of Arabia, did anybody ever see that? It's about 100 years ago. Great movie. Anyway, in the scene, there was some British soldiers. They're trying to figure out where they're going. And they mentioned Major Miss Bell's maps. In 1915, they appoint Gertrude to the military intelligence section. Her colleagues are Lawrence in uniform. This is Hogarth, the keeper of the Ashmolean Museum. This is a typical English officer. It just happened to be in the picture, but these are, some of the key players. and she's working with them. Her rank is now they now call her Major Miss Bell, because some of the military British officers would not listen to her. They were not going to take information from a woman, particularly a civilian. So they promoted to major. And she writes home, "I'm getting to feel quite at home as a staff officer." It is comic, isn't it? She loves the work. I love doing it. I can scarcely tear myself away from it. But in doing so, she encounters stiff opposition from numerous military men who have a large problem dealing with a woman, and not even in uniform, but wearing blue and white striped cotton dresses with large straw hats. None of this grousing phases her. As the war went on, the concept of enlisting the Arabs grows. One of the principal incentives was the promise, somewhat vaguely defined, that at the war's end, control over lands liberated from the Turks would be given to the Arabs. There was a subtle hint that Her Majesty's government might stay on just to help, but it was nowhere near as honest. Incidentally, after 2 weeks, she's given the bums rush out of the fortress. They want to get rid of her. She's driving them nuts. And they said, "You can go tomorrow morning." And she said, I would love to go, but would you mind if I spent another day surveying the fortress? So on her first day of freedom, she spends it taking pictures and everything. She was absolutely amazing. We're kind of going fast forward here because things are going to come to a head. The war, the Arabs are defeating the Turks more and more and more. They're headed north. They're becoming the revolution. The other tribes are sitting on the fence and they're waiting to see it. Now, if this turns out okay, maybe we'll join the British, which is what they do. British sovereigns, gold pieces really helped recruit Arabs. The specter of, it's out there. The promise of Arab self-government is out there. And that is going to be a problem for the British, particularly for the British in India. The last thing India wants to have happen is for these Bedouin tribes, these freed desert tribes to become self-governing and independent. So there's actually resistance coming from the British civil service in India against the offer of independence. With a population of millions of Muslims, the Indian government felt strongly that British rule should be over all Arabs. It worked well in India, and it would do so in the Middle East. To allay these fears, Gertrude is sent to India, and she is supposed to quell their anxiety and everything. She eases his mind, saying that Cairo is not looking nor expecting a pan-Arab nation after the war, but in Mesopotamia, as an independent nation with British government's guidance, the interests of the empire are still going to be maintained. So her message is to tell the British in India, it's not going to be one huge Arab state or one huge Arab country. It's just going to be this area here, what is now Iraq. That works a little bit, but it still doesn't quell their fears. She goes to Basra, which is all the way in eastern Iraq, to study the political climate. Her old colleague, Lawrence is assigned a mission in concert with her. He is given the charge of paying a bribe to release 10,000 British soldiers who are being held captive by the Turks. He's authorized to pay as much as 1.2 million pounds, but the Turks say no, they reject the offer, which, was a major setback to the British. In World War I in the Middle East, Gallipoli was not a bright spot for the British forces. There was one cluster after another. Churchill was part of the architect of the plan to invade Gallipoli. And so they didn't, the the Arabs did a pretty good job of tipping the scales against the Germans. She will stay in Basra until 1917. Basra is hot. It's much, much hotter. It's more malaria. It's not healthy. One of the hazards of being a European in this area was you're highly susceptible to disease. And she would catch malaria. She would suffer for a while. She'd recover, but it would take a lot out of her. The Arabs are winning. The British are winning. At the head of the Arab force is a Hashemite Emir, Hussein. Hussein was the old guy who had 4 sons. And he is going to be proclaimed king of the Hijaz. His son Faisal is being groomed as a potential leader by Lawrence and the British. In 1920, Faisal, which is this fellow right here, in 1920, he will be appointed the king of Iraq. In 1919, the war is over, and this is when the British and the rest of the world, the Allies, are going to divide up the spoils of war, particularly the Middle East, at the Paris Peace Conference, 1919. Lawrence and Gertrude Bell are about as welcome at the Paris Peace Talks as a skunk at a lawn party, because all of the pleading and all of the promises that they have articulated and carried out are getting scrubbed. Lawrence will be so dismayed that he'll leave the Middle East after the war. He'll never go back again. So he dies in a motorcycle accident, and he changes his name. He wants nothing to do with the past. And I gave this talk somewhere years ago, and there was an older gentleman in the audience, and he interrupted me and he said, "When I was a young lad, my mother told me, you be careful of that man with the motorcycle." And it was Lawrence.
Oh my gosh.
So I said, well, I'm glad you were careful. Anyway, until 1920, Iraq is going to have continuous unrest and rebellion. Who got what? France wants Lebanon. France wants the area closest to the Mediterranean Sea. France says to England, look, we were there all throughout the war, and we took a lot of casualties. France didn't do much in the Middle East, but they suffered heavily. And then it was basically, England, you owe us. England knows there's oil in Iraq and other areas. And the Royal Navy has just 3 or 4 years earlier converted completely from steam to oil. And the Royal Navy is the biggest navy in the world. And the British Merchant Marine has more ships than anybody in the world. Everything going to or coming out of England travels by boat. So, you know, the decisions are made. They got to keep the oil. Here's a picture of the Paris Peace Talks. Gertrude is right there with a hat on. There's a pet ocelot. Churchill is right here. Lawrence is in there somewhere. This is a newspaper article. There is a woman who looms large in the Mosul controversy. Although she strives to keep in the background, she is Gertrude Bell, the right-hand man of King Faisal. They called her a kingmaker. Faisal knew that with her help, he could go to the top. Famous picture. Churchill is second from the left on his camel. Gertrude is next to him. Supposedly, within seconds of this picture being taken, Churchill fell off his camel. Yeah, secrets. Here she is near the end of her life. She was a pretty woman. God, she was just so accomplished. Here she is at another conference. I tell you, the Arab leadership respected her so much more than the European. Another picture of that conference. Here's at a garden party. She stayed in Baghdad after the war. And, she would entertain. Her position in the social structure was top shelf amongst both English and Arabs. Here's Faisal. The fellow to his, well, this is Lawrence. But Lawrence, she did not fade into obscurity. I think she was tired of all the fighting and all of the traveling. And she just and she wasn't healthy. Here's a party at her estate. Everything was very, very formal when they entertained. When they had a party with the English and the Bedouins or the Arabs, everything was very, very highly formal. And here's a sketch. I think this is by Sargent. I think Sargent did that sketch of her. And she was 57 rather. She had a full military funeral. Pretty much consensus is she took her own life, sleeping pills. She was tired, and that's from what I've read, that was the cause of death.
Where was she when she died?
Baghdad.
Oh.
Yeah. But she was. She left $90,000 to the city of Baghdad to set up a museum. Very, very, a very, very thoughtful woman. And really, I hate to keep repeating it, but totally unstoppable. She did what she wanted. There was one Arab sheikh that she didn't like. He only had one eye, and he was constantly trying to get more bribes from her. And in her diary, she wrote that she said, God, I hope God will take the other eye. Sorry. Questions, please. Yeah.
I read a book by a woman who was born in the Fez, Medina, and growing up in a harem. She became a famous academic sociologist in Morocco. And in her book, she alludes to in Muslim history that even though she was raised in harem, which was like equivalent to what Gertrude Bell faced, social strictures, and that Bell broke through. But she said that in Muslim and Arab history that there had been a number of super charismatic, important, famous women. And she didn't devote much of the book to this. I don't think she even listed who they were. And I'm wondering if this is why the emirs and all were willing to work with her and negotiate with her, because there was a history in their culture of powerful women.
I would think that it's quite possible that would have come up in conversations, because she talked to all the leaders. And in those two books that I have here, neither one, I don't recall a lot of copy about women who were very, very famous in earlier Muslim.
Like 1200.
Yeah, both of them really pretty much stayed with the, we have such a small understanding of that whole part of the world anyway. And at least she opened it up, but things closed pretty quickly after too. I don't know. Anybody else?
There's a few online, but you go first.
No, I'm not. I don't have a particular question.
Okay. A question about when you mentioned that she was traveling with firearms. Do you know if she was trained to use them, and is that unusual for a woman of her stature?
I think a woman of her stature could probably I think people wouldn't have a problem with her knowing how to use firearms if they assumed it was for the hunt. Or shooting stag on your property, you know, but I'm not surprised, I mean, you know.
Do you know anything about her religious or spiritual background?
Not a lot, she wasn't she wasn't Church of England or anything, I
Oh,
think
okay.
she was, you know, did what she had to, but. If she had passion towards anything, well, I think. In England, the passion she had was towards the beauty of the plants and the gardens and things, you know, the English countryside. But she really just, you know, that quote, I think every day in the Syrian desert must add 2 years to your life, speaks volumes. Sir.
A little bit off subject, but she photographed and you mentioned a lot of ruins and other architecture out there. I'm just a little curious, and this may again be a little bit further than we've gone here. Ruins from whom? I mean, who were the ones who created the ruins? I mean, if she's in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
I realize there have been 1,000 years.
Yes,
prior to that.
yeah.
But
Well,
what were the societies that created these ruins?
well, I don't know the exact name, but I know that the Middle East and the Far East was heavily populated, and the trade routes, you know, the frankincense route, and you know, Hayel was one place where they stopped. Mecca, not, you know, in Saudi Arabia. So I don't know that they were formally identified as British or as in Peruvian. I'm not sure what the boundaries were or what the extent of the territories were. I think the people that built these castles were the people in power who had money, who would get duties from travelers, and they would build a castle, and they would build a castle to protect themselves, not so much as to be ostentatious. But the fortresses were also, I mean, they're all easily, defendable. But I don't know the exact tribes.
And
Yeah.
I know that, obviously a very harsh desert environment just erodes these structures really fast.
Yeah.
So they have to have a culture where people are maintaining, and putting, mud on the fresh mud on the outside.
Yeah.
And I know in Morocco, it's women, that was their job.
Yeah.
And so, when the role of women changed, all of a sudden the ruins deteriorated.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know really the answer. I mean, it would have to be, those ruins went back to like 1200, 1100.
So there may have been some historical, social.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be an Ukhaider, I'm sure.
Changes that affected who maintained and how well they were maintained.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think if you just took that one ruin, Ukhaider, yeah, there's got to be. I'll tell you who would know, would be the people that preceded her. Doughty there were two Englishmen, Doughty and I forget the other guy, but they basically traveled, and they're the ones that discovered some of these ruins. So, the Oxford University would send people to Syria to do an archaeological dig, so they would know who built what they were looking at. I don't have a clear answer for you.
Another one online. She was Major Ms. Bell. Was she formally on the payroll, and do you think she understood like how important her work was?
Well, I think she definitely knew her work was important. I know she was on the payroll in as much as she was a major, and she received full military burial, full military honors. So, I mean, I think there was along the same line, Lawrence, they made him an officer, and he was a total disaster as an officer. When you look at spit and polish and your Sam Brown belt, and his Batman was always chasing him, saying you forgot to button this, or your hat's at the right angle. He was but he was a guru of guerrilla warfare. So
a comment from someone online about the ruins that he did some quick searching, and it looks like she visited Byzantine, Hittite, and Abbasid ruins, among others.
Okay, well, yeah, the Byzantine, the Hittite.
And one more question. Did you ever cross paths with Agatha Christie? Because many of Christie's plots seem to reflect her life.
Unknown, I don't know. She was madly in love with Dick Doughty, and he was killed in Gallipoli.
Hmm. Do you know where she's buried?
Yeah, good question. I don't know. I would not be surprised that if some of her remains were in the Middle East and maybe
Yeah.
some at the family estate.
Just curious.